Bad. All right, so a little bit of vocab. If you have food security in your life, what does that mean?
Enough.
I'll take it. Your fridge is full, but it's full of something that's important, which is what? Nutrients. So you're secure because you have enough food and they're nutrient worthy types of food. If you're malnourished, you're lacking nutrients. Anybody know what nutrient I'm looking for?
Carbs.
Protein, okay? If you're undernourished, what are you lacking? You're lacking food in general, okay? There are four main reasons why people suffer from lack of food. What are they? Money, for sure. So areas in the world that do not have money or are considered poverty-stricken struggle to obtain food. Who else?
The government.
The politics in general control that to some extent. What else? Agriculture. Some areas don't have lands to grow food, which is a problem, especially when it's linked with this, which is what? Rationing or distribution. Good. That's a big problem, yes. So you have an area that doesn't have farmlands, and then they need to focus on governments stepping in to distribute food correctly, and then money is going to be an issue because if you can't buy it, we're not giving it to you. All of these play a kind of a united front. And for a long time, these were my notes right here. This little passage was this slide. It was, this is how food is, or this is the situation with food. Now I have in the past and today, I think soon I'm going to have 3 of these. But in the past, there was enough food to feed the world, but it wasn't what? Distributed correctly. Today, if I distribute food throughout the world equally, what do you think is going to happen to people? Not yet, but I'm sure we're getting there. What would happen? There is actually enough food to feed the world. It would be, I would say for us, definitely unsatisfying, right? But when you're hungry, anything will do. But anything won't provide you what? Nutrition. We would be malnourished. We would lack the necessary nutrients. And really that's, you go back to this picture that I have in the background. This individual is feeding, it's just they're feeding they're feeding malnourished, or they're not feeding nutritious food or eating nutritious food, so they end up with those swollen bellies, okay? Because of lack of proper nutrients leads to first, and then the pictures were pretty drastic, and then you've got all the bones. All right, so this is what diets around the world look like. What does MDC stand for? More developed or developed. We are fall into that category, less developed. Their diets differ. We get to eat a lot, but 50% of our diet comes from what? I mean, you could say anything, because anything is right. Animals and fats, okay? Which means the other 50 comes from vegetables and carbs, which is 3/4 the caloric intake that less developed. So 75% of the food that less developed countries eat is carbohydrates or lack of protein foods. And this is actually backwards. So if we're malnourished, what are we missing? Protein. I'm going to put that word in here because what I wrote in there is wrong. If we're undernourished, we're lacking food, period. Yes? And if we're overnourished, what are we?
Low nutrition.
What is this guy doing? He's sitting. Lack of activity in general. So you're taking in food and you're not really breaking it up. You're overnourished. All right, so for production of food, we're not just gonna talk about production of food. We're gonna talk about everything about food. How it's made, what types of foods are made, what types of lands are used to make them, how it's distributed, how it's processed, and every problem associated with that, which is a lot. That's the majority of these notes. So we start with the three, and this is what this slide is saying, that there's three main, and by systems they mean areas of the world or production of types of specific foods. We're going to narrow it down to three. The first one is what? Grassland. What kind of grassland? Remember, we got a little more deep on Friday. What kind of farmland? Croplands, okay? So we're looking at lands that are used to grow crops, and here's the interesting part of this. 77% of all food that is consumed in the world comes from croplands. Only 11% of the world is made up of a cropland. So the diet that most people consume, only 11% of the world holds the lands to provide us with that diet. Pretty crazy. Yeah, pretty scary. Then we move to what I call the middleman. What type of land is this? What do we call grazing lands? We had this problem. It is a type of grassland. Rangelands, good. It is. It's a rangeland. And these rangelands, look, here they are in the world. Where are rangelands? 16% of food comes from rangelands, and 22% of the world makes up rangelands. So they're kind of in the middle. 22% of the world has grazing animals on it and provide us with the meat that we eat, and only 16% of our diet comes from that. And then we move here. Only 7% of our food comes from oceans, which once made up the majority of the diet. And how much of Earth is oceans? 70%. So the majority of Earth is this type of system, but only 7% of our food comes from it. And that's because of overconsumption. At the end of the day, people used to feed primarily from this source until they started growing crops and started growing cattle and things like that. But we overfished and lost that resource. All right, what are most produced foods in the world? Wheat, sugar cane, potato, good. And corn. And then we've got 47% of our calories come from wheat, rice, and corn. This most produced foods in the world used to be a big topic. White rice and corn and potatoes were the only ones on the list. But sugarcane is so profitable that it's become a highly produced crop. This is the last slide. All right, so we obviously know we have a situation on Earth where there's so many people. So in order to meet our goal for food production, what do we have to increase? Production. What does that mean? What does it mean to increase the amount produced per given area? Well, no, that's how we're going to do it. But if you increase the amount per unit area, what are you increasing? The blank of food. Supply. I'm going to give you a letter. Yes. Which really is supply. But you think of yield because supply can mean over any plot of land. If you increase yield, you're going to increase profits. Keep that in mind, okay? But we want to think of two things. If we're going to study environmental science, we want to know that we're going to produce enough food to feed the world, provide nutritious foods to feed the world, okay? But we want to make sure we do it considering two things, which is what? We want to make sure, if we're environmental, that in the production of increase of food supply or yield, we consider two things. What? Sustainability, which covers everything you're thinking. Pollution, waste, loss of energy, or overuse, or producing fossil fuels, all these things, right? We want to make sure that we're going to produce food, but we're going to consider saving lands for the future, saving resources for the future. And then we also want to make sure that in the production, the amount that we put in is better than the amount we get out. Remember the input, throughput, output. What's that? Making the system the most what? Efficient. Good. And I'm done.